Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Week 5 preview podcast. I'm Josh Welge here with Steve Soucie, recording on Tuesday morning. Steve, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. Seems crazy we're heading into the pivot week. I mean, after we're done with Week 5 here, that we're over halfway home on the regular season. It just, once again, speeds by. It seems like the calendar goes so much faster when we're in high school football season.
I know. It just flies along. It just goes faster, it seems, every year. But the good thing is that, I feel like as we get deeper in the season, that the storylines become more and more interesting because you start to get a little more data and things like that. It's good stuff. A lot to talk about this week. We will look at some of the big Week 5 games. But as always, want to have a little playoff projection discussion this week. Sousa's updated playoff projections will be posting on FridayNightDrive.com on Wednesday morning. Souce, there's a lot to talk about, man. I got a call from you last Thursday afternoon on the way to a high school volleyball match, and it was not the call that I was expecting. Your projections, a little bit of a tweak this week with some variables that I don't think either of us were anticipating. Why don't you fill everybody in on that?
Well, regular viewers of the projections on a week-to-week basis are going to notice some changes in this week's projection, and the reason for that is the Illinois High School Association was informed that the information that they got in regards to enrollments of not the private schools but non-private schools, basically all of the enrollment data was wrong, and there were various extremes to how wrong they were. For the most part, they were all lowering of individual schools' enrollments. In some cases, by simply a couple of students, maybe others, 10 to 15, maybe 20, some upwards of 200. And across the board, like I said, they all went down. But where this became an issue is the schools that were residing around the bubbles between classifications. Some of those schools went down a few students. Some of those schools went down 20 students. So there was some shuffling on the overall list of where schools fit on the enrollment sheet. And in some cases, it caused schools that maybe were on one side of the bubble to shift to the other side of the bubble. And it had nothing to do with what teams were qualifying for the playoffs. It was where they fit on the overall list. Some schools moved as much as 15 or 20 spots. Some schools stayed exactly where they were, but if they were in a small spot and several schools jumped over them, then that caused them to be maybe pushed down. So there were only a couple of really dramatic changes. Peoria is one that stands out to me, dropping nearly 300 from their enrollment. It was looking immediately like they were going to be maybe a 6A school. Now they look like they're clearly a 5A school, and oddly enough, actually somewhat close to the 4A, 5A bubble when last week they looked like a secure 6. But that was an extreme case. But you're going to see, like I said, a lot of those schools that were on the bubble, they may have moved where they're either more secure in the other classes. I think one of the more notable ones is Montini was a lot closer to the 5A line than they are now, and I'm not really sure how that all worked out, but that was basically what happened. And then we also had some natural field changes that, we had 16 more schools come in or return to the field that weren't there last week. So all told, the biggest changes came in 4 and 5A. Usually maybe there'll be 3 or 4 different schools on a big week early on that changed. One of the classes had 8 different schools from last week's projection. Another had 6. Those are extremely high numbers, especially for being kind of at the midway point. So this will all settle in because now we have the locked-in numbers, so we won't have these violent changes every single week. But it was definitely kind of a shocking thing to look at. To be fair, there were probably 100 of the changes, because there were almost 400 schools that changed their enrollment number in some way or form. To be fair, I would say 25% of those, the change was 3-4 students. So it was not that big of a deal. But for the group of students some of them were changing 10 or 15, maybe they were already in one of the smaller classifications and on the bubble, it was a big deal.
You mentioned Peoria has been one. I mean, was this change, was it a predominantly one area of the state, like say Chicago, or was it kind of all over the map?
No, it was kind of all over the map. I mean, like I said, there was only one school that saw no change whatsoever. They were exactly the same. That was Bismarck-Henning. But if you look at the list in general, the bigger sweeping changes were obviously in the bigger schools. Most of the ones that saw like triple-digit changes, 100, 150, 200, they were in the 7A, 8A variety. But there were some schools, 3A, 4A, that saw changes 20, 25. And when you think about how close those classification numbers are between classes, 20 or 25 students is a big deal for a smaller school in their enrollment numbers. So it was definitely kind of a change type of thing that you just kind of had to get used to. And when I was looking at it this week, I just kind of noticed, well, that team moved up 6 spots on the overall enrollment sheet. That team moved, maybe 12, 13. That's probably going to have an effect, and it did. So it was, and that combined with some of the other schools that moved in and taking some schools out, it definitely has a different look and different feel to some of the brackets.
You mentioned Montini now closer to the 4A line, whereas Peoria, because of their enrollment change adjustment down, the schools that did not see the adjustment in their enrollment, are they predominantly moving up or down, or which way? Because I remember you told me this last week, and I sort of I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, all right, well, there's a lot of smaller schools predominantly, then other teams are going to be move up. So I don't know. What do you think?
Across the board, it was a downward shift.
Okay.
So, I mean, there were only 3 schools that added enrollment from this situation, and it was negligible. So, so basically what is happening here is while everybody went down, how much did they go down? Yeah. So if you were in an area where you went down 3, but all the schools around you went down 10 or 15, then all those schools were going to skip past you, and you were going to go down. So you can't really identify, was it an up, was it a down? It's more about how much did you gain relative to the people that were already around you. So if you lost 3, but everybody around you lost 10 or 15, they're going to slide past you. You're going to go down, even though you lost enrollment number. So it's kind of a hard thing to say, to make a blanket statement what it means. Because if you lost 20, the guy over there lost 10, and you were on the same enrollment spot, well, you're going to slide up that chart. They're going to slide. They may slide down or hold. It's an individual case-by-case basis.
How much extra work did that give you this week?
It was a fair amount. Let's just say that. I'm not going to calculate exactly how much it was. Well, it wasn't so much work because the number adjustment maybe took me an hour. But then I actually wanted to see, well, how much does this number adjustment do? That took a little bit longer because I did a slot study to see, well, these guys moved up 15, these guys moved down 4. And I wanted to see how much that affected. So that took a while, more than I would be comfortable sharing and admitting.
Did they say why this transpired? Have you seen something like this before? Because that's a really large number for September 23rd. I guess.
Well, I got word back in the spring that the collection of the information was not as fluid as it has been in the past, and that was why we didn't get the original numbers until August.
Yeah.
And then when we got this I'll call it an update, it was explained to me that the data was wrong. That was all the information that I got. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what the source of it was, but this has never happened before where we've gotten an enrollment update in season. Never happened before, because usually that number is locked in July or August. And since prior to this year we were using the 2-year enrollments, there was no opportunity for it to go anywhere. So no, this is unprecedented as in regard to an in-season adjustment like this. It's never happened before.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's adjustments, as you talked about every week, about in the middle of the classifications throughout the year. This is just, an added variable that nobody saw coming.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's like when I got the information, I responded to the person who told me with, "Are you kidding me? Is this a joke? Like, are you messing with me right now?" Because I mean, it was a lot, and like I said, and I think honestly, right now, I mean, they didn't make any formal announcement on this. I don't think a lot of people even realize that it happened at this point.
Yeah, not until they check out Souce's projections on Wednesday morning, and they're like, "What the heck? Why is my school here?" So yeah. So again, check out Souce's player projections that are going to be coming out on Friday Night Drive on Wednesday morning. I think we'll take a quick break here from our sponsors. We'll come back and look at Week 5 games.
I'm State Representative Steve Reich. Since 2017, I've led the fight to reform our child welfare system and supported educational choice for every kid in Illinois. I've worked to stop the collapse of our public pensions while standing up for businesses that are being crushed by crippling mandates. And I've never forgotten who pays the bill. The work isn't finished, and as I run for re-election, I'm asking for your support. I'm Steve Reich, and I approve this message.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
Back on the Friday Night Drive Week 5 preview podcast. Josh Welge here with Steve Soucie. And Souce, looking quickly back on Week 4, the unbeatens, they had a tough Friday last weekend and a tough weekend. They really took a hit. I think I read from your story on Monday that 108 teams came in Week 4 unbeaten, and nearly half of them got beat. And the one thing that really stood out to me is, the larger classifications, 5A to 8A, there's a dwindling number, and it's going to continue to dwindle.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing that kind of came out of the data was when I was reworking the power rankings for this week, I looked and I noticed that through 4 weeks of the season, there are only 11 undefeated teams left in the power rankings. So of the top 25 teams, there's only 11 left. And this early in the season, I can't ever remember the number being that low. So, I mean, right now what we have is a situation where the undefeated class is very, very low. There are only 7 games this week that feature a 4-0 against a 4-0. That's also extremely low. And then on top of it, like I said, you look at something like the power rankings, limited number of 4-0 teams statewide, a huge group of 3-1 teams at this point, also a higher number than I'm used to having at this situation. I like to call certain weeks of the season kind of a transitionary week. I think this is one of those weeks where we're going to get, there's going to be a lot more defined distinction after we get through Week 5. I think the 5-0 class is going to be once again relatively low. That 3-1 group is going to get compacted severely as well, because there's a lot of matchups with one-loss teams against one another, against the undefeated group, against promising 2-2s. So I think that one-loss pack is going to impact hugely this week as well. So definitely an interesting week. Maybe not as many explosive matchups at the top of the list, but a lot in that middle group that I think are independently really interesting to look at, because I think there's still fairly even teams clashing against each other. They might just have one loss or two losses.
Yeah, I mean, there's one matchup that tops for me between a 4-0 and 3-1. It's Batavia going to St. Charles North. And you mentioned a week maybe lacking explosive matchups. I feel like every season when these two teams get together, it's some sort of an explosive matchup. Batavia, they dropped that week 1 game to Glenbard West, and I feel like there's maybe a collective, maybe there's a little bit of a drop in Batavia. They've just kind of rolled since then. And St. Charles North, I mean, they're 4-0 so far. I mean, their defense looks really strong. That's a matchup that seems to never disappoint in the Duquesne Conference. I think we're going to learn a lot more. I'm very interested to see what St. Charles North does this week against Batavia.
I am too, and touching back against your Batavia point now, and I think we'll talk about the other factor in that scenario a little bit later here. But now I think we're learning it's pretty much smacking us in the face. If you were perceiving that Batavia loss as a bad loss early in the season, no, that was not a bad loss. That we're finding out how good Glenbard West is on a week-to-week basis here. So it may have just simply been a situation where, frankly, Batavia's a really, really good team. They got beat by possibly a better team on that day. So it wasn't just kind of one of these week 1 things. And like you said, Batavia's really been on a roll since doing that. It hasn't even really seemed like they've been pushed since that week 1 loss. And, St. Charles North is kind of a little bit of a wild card right now for me still, even though they're undefeated. It's just, I'm not really sure how they're going to respond to this game. I know, obviously, big rivalry. They're both pretty excited about it. They're both top 10 teams in the rankings. It should be a really good one. But I really feel like this outcome could go a lot of different ways, and I wouldn't be really surprised by almost any of them.
No, not at all. I mean, again, this is a matchup that I feel every year it's either going to overtime or it's going very close to overtime. It's just down to the wire. And I'm not going to be a spoiler alert. I'm not going to give it away. Check out Soucie's projections. Or maybe not check it out. St. Charles North, maybe they won't be in the classification that we're used to. Am I correct?
Yeah, it is kind of definitely a situation to monitor moving forward. To say that they are a bubble team right now, especially after the enrollment shift, they were one of the teams that I think had a little bit of an effect there. They are definitely on bubble watch right now between 6 and 7A.
Yeah. Another great matchup, 4-0 and 3-1. Lions going to Glenbard West on Saturday. Glenbard West, I tell you what, they can't be much more impressive than they have been early in the year. When you have Batavia, Joliet Catholic, and Downers Grove North on your resume through 4 weeks of the season, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I was home on Saturday, and I had that game up, and I didn't have the sound on. I wasn't listening to it that wise. Had it on one of my screens, and I was working on other stuff. I was scrambling through data and doing all kinds of other stuff like I do on Saturdays. So I wasn't really watching it with intent, but it seemed like every time I looked up out of the corner of my eye, Glenbard West was making a big play. The score had changed, and it looked like they were on their way to a runaway. That score at the end was a lot closer than I think that game actually was, and it was just another eye-opening performance for them, and they have been spectacular to start this season. Now with A.J. Rayford back under center, they have their full arsenal again, and it's been really, really impressive.
I remember last week, either on this podcast or the one that I do at Joe Bennett's, I said that last week's game with Downers Grove North and also this week's game too with Lions was sort of like plant our flag time, that, hey, we've shown we're pretty good, and now we're really going to show we're back in the next couple weeks. And, man, to be able to do what they did against Downers Grove North, caveat, Downers Grove North still without their quarterback, Owen Lansu. Still, what they did, pretty darn impressive either way. And now they got Lions coming in. Lions coming off of a close loss to Hinsdale Central, a loss that, if you talk to the Lions people, they kind of felt like they let that one get away. They were leading most of the game. They're the defending conference champions. Now they go to Glenbard West. I mean, great matchup on Saturday. We're going to learn a lot more about both of these teams.
It's interesting. I mean, that's a game that was, very interesting to watch the outcome of on Saturday. Obviously you had the Glenbard West game you were keeping an eye on. that conference is doing exactly what I thought they were going to do this year. There may be a few more components in there, but we haven't even really talked about York. They're just quietly heading into the back end of the schedule when they have those games that are interesting against that now these other schools are taking part in now. So they're kind of an X factor in this race, but it feels like every week we're getting, showdowns in this conference, and it seems like eventually we should run out of them. But week by week, we keep getting more and more and more, and I think that speaks to the depth of this particular group. I'm interested to see how this, when the dust clears, how this stacks. Is it a clean stack? And when I say a clean stack, is it 0, 1, 2, 3 losses, or is it 1, 1, 2, 2? I mean, like that's what I'm interested in seeing how this all plays out, because I don't think there's a clear pecking order here. I think it's kind of jumbled. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out to see whether or not that suspicion is correct.
I think it's a league that if they can't, I think there's a potential for 5 teams to get to the playoffs so they can get to 5 wins. And if they do, I think they're going to be teams you don't want to get in your bracket. I mean, I think that Lions loss last week was probably more about the growth of Hinsdale Central this year. They almost beat Downers North the week before. A lot of experience in that roster with a 4-year starting quarterback and a lot of experience around them. And you mentioned York. I mean, my God, their schedule has to be the most backloaded schedule.
Yes.
History of schedules. I mean, if you talk to their coach, Don Gelsomino, I can't think that he likes that because they play all their tougher games, at least from a conference standpoint, the last few weeks of the season.
Yeah, no, and that's what like I said, they're kind of the X factor here because we don't really know how they match up with any of those teams right now, while the other 4, obviously, just last week, we have data on those, and we kind of have a feel of like where those guys are at. And I think it's so close in some cases. Some of those results might get flipped from the way that we're anticipating. But as far as York goes, I don't really know where they fall in that group, and we're not going to find out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, especially given that I thought they might have been the best of the group coming into the year. So I really don't know, what to make of it. So a lot of things are going to shake down in that league the last few weeks. A lot of things are going to shake down in a league that I'm familiar with, that you're familiar with, the Southwest Prairie West Division. They currently, I think you said in your Monday story, they have 3 teams undefeated in that league. They're the only league in the state that has 3 unbeatens left, and 2 of those play this Friday. I'm going to be there for this game. Yorkville going to Oswego. And, I mean, that should be a really, really good matchup. A lot of running, a lot of good defense, a lot of familiarity. Looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I think for me, both of these teams, to be honest with you, from where I had evaluated them at the beginning of the season, have surprised me. And I think there have been some, I guess, bookmarks to tell us that this was probably what we were going to come up against. And I didn't really expect some of those bookmarks. I'm like, I was talking with Matt Rodewald recently, and he had mentioned St. Patrick is off to a 3-1 start. Their only loss, a touchdown loss to Yorkville in week 1. And at the beginning of the season, I looked at that and I didn't really know what to take from that. Well, now it's starting to look like, well, maybe that was just a really good defensive scuffle between 2 pretty good football teams. Yorkville kind of has established that that's kind of the tone that they like to take in games. And Oswego, for me, one of the bigger surprises, maybe not that they're 4-0 at this point, but kind of in the dominant fashion that they've done it. I kind of thought, and I don't know how you feel about this, you have a little bit more experience with this team. I thought that they had lost quite a bit to graduation, was going to have a hard time replacing some of that. And, I mean, I know they missed those guys, but it really kind of feels like they haven't really skipped much of a beat.
No, I mean, I talked to Coach Brian Cooney about that last night, and I asked him about the start. I'm like, it's been kind of a broken record of we're surprised at Oswego's start. Are you surprised? And he said, am I surprised that we're 4-0 going to week 5? I'm not falling out of my chair surprised. It's not that they're undefeated. I think he's even surprised at the dominance that they've had so far in the year. I mean, they really controlled that game against Naples Central, who's maybe turning out to be a little bit down this year. But then, I mean, the game that really stands out to me is what they did Geneva, beating Geneva the way they did in week 2, 35-6. I mean, their defense, I mean, I don't know. They may not be as strong up front and in the boxes they've been, but their defensive backfield is really athletic and really outstanding. I think they got like 5 or 6 interceptions already. They've returned a couple for interceptions. They got a junior quarterback, Drew Kleinhans, that I wrote about week 1 after their win. His dad's offense coordinator. He's really good. He's one of the best quarterbacks I've seen wear that uniform. So they've been really impressive. And you've mentioned Yorkville. I mean, they play good defense. They got a pretty good quarterback too. They've just been solid. I mean, I know Plainfield East plays on that other side of the conference, so maybe we question the strength of them, but that was a really kind of, dominant performance by Yorkville last week. So yeah, a lot to look forward to. I'm really looking forward to that game on Friday, Yorkville and Oswego. Looking at some of the other games, another program that I'm kind of getting more and more curious about is Kaneland. They're 4-0. Again, they've been pretty dominant being 4-0. And now they got Morris coming to town. So I think we're going to continue to learn more about Kaneland with Morris coming in.
Well, when you look at the Interstate 8 conference at the beginning of the year, it's always like, well, who's going to come out of this thing? Because, I mean, you've got Sycamore, who has been kind of a standout over the past, decade or so. Rochelle has demonstrated that they are always a tough team to beat. Morris is always present in that mix. Kaneland always seems to have solid teams, but it almost feels like they're in the mix of that group. It's almost like, hey guys, we're over here too, and it's one of those things when you look at it, you have that situation going on. So with Kaneland, it's still for me kind of, you got to show me that you can take those teams out, on a somewhat regular basis. And this is an interesting challenge for them to kind of start that gauntlet, because Morris has answered the bell every time this season. You look back at it, I mean, yeah, granted, Wilmington, a smaller school, but a very, very powerful smaller school football program. They fended them off. They kind of shook off that menace that is Peoria, that a team that they've had a lot of trouble with. They went down to Peoria and won that. I think this Morris team is a very, very good football team. So a wonderful measuring stick for Kaneland right now to say, hey, we're 4-0 too, scoring a lot of points, doing a lot of positive things. Is that 4-0? I mean, is that a really solid, legitimate 4-0 when you play a team like Morris? Can we beat a team like Morris? So it's definitely a great game to kind of get a feel for how strong the only 2 undefeated teams in that conference are, because at least on paper right now, it looks like maybe both Sycamore and Rochelle are maybe a step back from where they've been the last couple of years. There's been some losses that I wouldn't expect either one of those programs to take so far this year. So ultimately, this is going to decide who's in the driver's seat. And it might ultimately be, I think, the best 2 teams in this league.
Yeah, it could be. One thing to watch for Kaneland, they're really good running back, linebacker Carter Grabowski. He left the game last week against Ottawa with an injury. I know our Joe Bennett was there. He thought maybe it might have been, hey, let's take it easy, let's precautions. But that is one thing to note, because Carter Grabowski is a huge part of what Kaneland is. Another matchup on Friday that, maybe kind of looking forward to since the first couple weeks of the season in Western Illinois. Newman playing Rockridge. Newman and Rockridge are both, I think they're both top 3 in 1A and 2A, respectively. They both kind of open eyes in the first 2 weeks of the season. Newman beat Princeton, and then Rockridge beat Princeton. What do you make of this matchup?
It's definitely a situation where you're kind of looking at that and saying, these are the 2 in the Three Rivers Conference right now that you kind of have to keep an eye on. Princeton, with those losses early on, kind of throws you a little bit, but they'll be a factor by the end too. But these 2 programs, consistently solid. It tends to be just one of those, let's just smash into each other for 2 hours and see who survives it. Both really strong programs in the small school divisions. It's one of those games. I use the phrase coin flip a lot, but this is one that definitely, you can analyze it all you want, but ultimately what it comes down to is you've just got 2 excellent small school football programs and it could be one or two breaks that ultimately, separates the two of them when they meet.
Yeah, should be a good one, 4-0 and 4-0. And of course, before we get out of here, I mean, there's some matchups that are not involving 4-0 teams, but they're involving teams that are really good, that really need wins bad. I mean, Joliet Catholic, they got a win last week. Well, now they got to beat Nazareth this week to kind of keep it going. And Marist, man, backs against the wall. Well, guess what? Now you got to play Montini.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the Catholic League gauntlet. Another one in that league that I find pretty interesting on paper. Wheaton, St. Francis, and Providence. That's another one where I kind of look at it and say, but you look at that schedule, even though this week is a crossover between the divisions. Some of those divisions are rising up and playing a little bit better, so they look like they might have a chance against, maybe some of those bigger divisions that tend to dominate those games. So there's a lot of interesting matchups in those crossovers, a lot of opportunities, maybe not for the underdog in that situation to expect a win, but give them an opportunity to show, hey, we can play with a team like that. I would be surprised, for example, there are the games against the Blue. Those schools probably aren't going to lose those games, but I'm interested to see if maybe they're bridging that competitive gap a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt about that. A lot of good stuff coming up this weekend. A lot of good stuff on Friday Night Drive. I'm going to be back here later today with Joe Bennett as we do our Western Suburbs podcast on Thursday. Eddie Griffey on JT Penalty will be doing their South and West podcast. Soucie, I'm pretty sure you'll be taping with Mason Schweizer for our Kankakee one as well. It's a good listen. And of course, Steve, you're back on Friday night with Matt Rodewald for our live stream. We're going to get out of here. Again, for Steve Soucie, this is Josh Welge. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your week and enjoy week 5.